Alright, welcome to Blender. This is what it looks like. I know you might be thinking, where the heck do I start? You have all these menus and buttons and options in front of you and it's overwhelming. And I know what that's like. When I first downloaded Blender a very long time ago, I opened it up, I looked at it, then I deleted it. It was just a mess of buttons that confused me. But things were significantly different back then. I mean, some tools weren't even in the menus, so if you didn't know the hotkey for some things, you wouldn't be able to use them. It took me a while to download it again and start using it and loving it. But that was Blender then, and this is Blender now, and it's awesome. And we're going to take things one step at a time. For much of the first couple chapters, there's no need to follow each step if you don't want to. Just watch and listen and absorb the information as best as you can. All the keys being pressed will pop up in the lower left corner, so you can see the hotkeys I use for different operations. This chapter is a primer for working in 3D space. The first thing to note is the grid, made up of these vertical and horizontal lines. If you've ever done basic graphing in math class, it's the same concept, except instead of just the x and y axis, we have a z-axis as well for the third dimension. So we're graphing in three-dimensional space. This grid is mainly there as a guide to aid in modeling. For example, when you're modeling something where dimensions or proportions are important, you can use the grid to measure. So one block can equal 1 foot or 1 meter depending on the measurement you want to use. The actual term used for these blocks is called Blender units. So if you're following a tutorial that says move an object over 5 Blender units, then you just move that object over 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're in front view. The red line stretching horizontally here is the x-axis. The vertical blue line here is the z-axis. And if we go in top view, you'll see a green line, which is the y-axis. And in the bottom left corner, you'll see a mini-axis you can refer to as well. Now to change views, we use the numpad. For those of you without a numpad, you can use your number row by enabling an option in the User Preferences. So go to File, select User Preferences, and under the Input tab, enable Emulate Numpad. And make sure to save user settings if you want to keep that setting. So let's close that. And to get to front view, press numpad 1. And we're already in front view, so nothing changed. This is the front side of the cube. I'm going to move that back to the center. So we're in front view of the cube right now, numpad 1. Side view is numpad 3. Top view is numpad 7. So 1, 3, and 7. Now say we want the back view of the cube instead of the front view. Simply hold Control and press numpad 1, and you'll get the inverse. So this is the back view of the cube. Same thing goes with the side view. Let's go into side view, and let's get the other side of the cube now by holding Control and pressing numpad 3. And same with the top view. Press numpad 7 to get into top view, hold Control and press numpad 7 to get into the bottom view. So to recap, switching views is numpad 1, 3, and 7, and the inverse is holding Control and pressing 1, 3, or 7. Now all of these view options can be found in the 3D header anyway. So if you go into the header of the 3D view, select the View menu, and you have all the different views here. Left, right, back, front, bottom, top, camera, all of it. So if you forget the hotkey, you can find it in this menu. Now that we can change views, let me show you two different view types, orthographic and perspective. Perspective is just like it sounds. If you remember art class and drawing perspective guidelines meeting at the horizon to help give your drawings a 3D effect, that's exactly what it is here. When you enable perspective viewing, everything has depth. Right now, the cube has no depth. This is orthographic view. It's just a flat view of the scene with no depth. Now if you press numpad 5 to toggle perspective, you can see it gives the scene a little bit of depth. Press numpad 5 again to toggle back orthographic. Now everything's flat again. Both different view types have their benefits when creating a scene. Orthographic allows you to view a whole scene in an organized way, while perspective allows you a better idea of how it will look rendered with some dimension to it. I switch back and forth frequently when creating models. Now let me show you how to navigate in 3D space using the keyboard and the mouse. First, to rotate the scene, click the middle mouse button and drag it around. Now we can see the cube from any angle we want. To zoom in and out, use the scroll wheel on the mouse. You can also press Ctrl and middle click and drag up and down. And to pan the scene, hold Shift and middle click and drag. And that's all you need to know for how to move about your scene. If for any reason you pan the scene too far over and you can't find your objects, press Shift and C and it will center all objects into view. Boom. Everything's in the center now. Now, if you don't have a middle mouse button, go to the File menu, select User Preferences, and under the Input tab, enable Emulate 3-button mouse. And again, save user settings if you want to save that setting. Now, Alt and left click is equivalent to the middle mouse button. So if you hold Alt and left click on the scene and drag it around, it'll rotate the scene. So it's just like pressing the middle mouse button. Hold Alt and left click and drag. So holding Alt and Control and left click zooms in and out. And hold Alt and Shift and left click and you can pan the scene. Now the last thing in this chapter is the different shading modes. These are just different ways of visualizing your scene. You can find the different shading modes in the 3D header right here, under a menu called Viewport Shading. The default shading mode is called Solid, which is what we see on our cube right now. It just uses basic default lighting to quickly shade your object so you can see how it looks. So this is what the cube looks like in solid shading. Bounding box mode will simply show cubes representing the boundary of every object in the scene. So in essence, it replaces your object with a cube that's approximately the same size. So for example, in top view, if I add a sphere, and we're still in solid shading mode, if I then go ahead and enable bounding box shading, the sphere is replaced with a cube that has the same height and width. And the cube was also replaced with a cube with the same height and width, but of course that looks no different because they're both cubes. So, this mode is useful when you have very complex scenes slowing down your computer. If you switch to this mode, everything is by a cube. Now, wireframe mode is something you'll be using a lot. This shows you the wireframe of every object. You'll see all the edges that compose the objects. There's no lighting in this mode, just lines. So if we enable that, we can see that our objects are replaced with all the lines that compose them. So you see every edge that makes up our sphere and every edge that makes up our cube. Now textured shading will shade your objects based on their materials and the lighting in the scene and give you a bit more accurate representation of the final product. We'll be using this a lot as well. So let's enable that by going to the shading menu and select texture. You can see it lights the object based on the one lamp we have in the scene. And they don't really have materials, so both of our objects are going to be white. And a new shading type as of 2.6.8 is called rendered, where if your computer is fast enough, it will actually show the final render in the 3D view and allow you to rotate the scene and still move objects and everything. So let's enable that real quick. And although it's slow, it gives you a quick render of the scene. And if your computer's fast enough, this is definitely going to be a useful shading mode for you. So that was just a quick overview of 3D space and navigating and shading. So now that we got the primer out of the way, we can move on to learning more about Blender as a program and how to use it.